Tonight you'll get into bed, set an alarm, and fall asleep in a heated room behind a locked door. Now take all of that away. It's the year 900, you're in a smoke-filled longhouse in Norway. The sun went down at 3 in the afternoon, and it will not come back for 17 hours. Everyone you know is inside this one room with you. So are the animals. And the night has barely started. We think we know the Vikings. Axes, longships, some unlucky monastery having the worst morning in recorded history. But raiding was a summer job. It was seasonal work, like fruit picking, except with more screaming. The other side of the Viking year, the side nobody makes shows about, was dark. Genuinely, oppressively dark. And what these people did inside that darkness built more of their civilization than any raid ever did. Start with the sun, because in Scandinavia the sun is the entire problem. At the latitude of Trondheim, midwinter daylight lasts about 4.5 hours. Go further north, into the territory of the Norse settlements above the Arctic Circle, and the sun simply doesn't rise at all. Not dim, not gloomy, gone, for weeks. There is a stretch of the year in northern Norway where the concept of daytime is essentially theoretical. So the Norse year wasn't split into 4 seasons the way ours is. It was split into 2, sumar and vetra, summer and winter. That's it. Their calendar acknowledged one useful half of the year and one survival half, and the winter half was where most people spent most of their lives. Now picture the building they spent it in. A Viking longhouse was typically somewhere between 15 and 30 meters long, with walls of turf or timber, a roof packed with sod for insulation, and no windows. None. A window is a hole, and a hole in Norway in January is a way to die slower. The only opening was a smoke vent in the roof, and even that got partially closed when the wind picked up. Down the center of that building ran a long open hearth, burning constantly. Not for atmosphere. That fire was the difference between a household and a group of frozen bodies discovered in the spring. Someone had to keep it alive through the night, every night, all winter. Losing the fire in a blizzard wasn't inconvenient. It was potentially fatal for everyone under that roof. Which means the air inside was thick. Excavations of Norse settlements consistently show soot deposits coating interior surfaces, and studies of skeletal remains from Iceland and Greenland show signs consistent with long-term smoke exposure in the sinuses and lungs. Everyone in that room had a permanent low-grade cough. Everyone smelled like a bonfire. Nobody thought this was strange, because there was no alternative to compare it to. A longhouse might hold an extended family, unmarried workers, enslaved people, and, in the coldest regions, the livestock. Cattle were often housed in a byre at one end of the same structure, separated by a partition. This sounds unpleasant, and it absolutely was, but a cow produces something like a kilowatt of body heat. Your animals weren't just property, they were central heating that occasionally needed milking. So that's the room. 20, 30, sometimes 40 people, animals at one end, one fire in the middle, no windows, and 17 hours to fill. What do you actually do? The first answer is, you work. This is the part that gets erased entirely by the raiding warrior image. Winter was when Norse society manufactured everything. Textile production alone was staggering. A single square meter of Viking wool sail could take somewhere around 8 to 10 hours of spinning and weaving. A full sail for a longship might require the wool of hundreds of sheep and thousands of hours of labor, almost all of it done by women, almost all of it done indoors during the dark months. Sit with that for a second. The Viking Age is defined by ships crossing oceans. Those ships could not move without sails, and those sails were made in the dark, by firelight, by women spinning wool over the course of entire winters. The most iconic technology of the era was produced during the least glamorous part of the year, by the people history books mention least. No winter work, no sails. No sails, no Viking Age. Men worked too. Winter was for repairing tools, carving, forging, making rope, mending nets, shaping the wooden components of everything the household needed. Archaeological finds from Norse sites are full of small carved objects, gaming pieces, combs, decorated handles, the kind of intricate work that only makes sense if someone had a great deal of time and nowhere else to be. The second answer is, you eat what autumn left you. There was no winter agriculture. Food was preserved months in advance through drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting. Fish were hung on wooden racks in the cold coastal air until they turned into hard, storable slabs. Stockfish, a technology so effective it became a major Norwegian export for the next 1,000 years, and is still made the same way today. Meat was salted or smoked in the rafters above the hearth. Dairy was turned into skyr, a thick soured product still eaten in Iceland. And in a genuinely brutal detail, some Norse communities preserved food by burying it or storing it in whey, producing flavors that modern visitors to Iceland describe using words that cannot be said in a monetized video. By late winter, the stores ran low. This is the part romantic depictions leave out. Isotope analysis and skeletal evidence from Norse populations show growth interruption lines in teeth and bones, physical scars from periods of malnutrition during childhood. The long night wasn't just boring. Every year it was a slow test of whether autumn's planning had been good enough. The third answer, and the one that changed the world, is you talk. Here's a thing anthropologists have documented across firelit societies. Daytime conversation is logistics. Who's going where, what needs doing, what's running out. Nighttime conversation around a fire is something else entirely. It becomes stories. Long, elaborate, morally complicated stories about ancestors and gods and people in distant places. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups found the split is dramatic. Daytime talk is overwhelmingly practical, while the large majority of firelit night talk is narrative. The Norse had no widespread book culture during the Viking Age. Runes existed, but they were used for inscriptions, markers, short messages, not for storing epics. Everything else, the myths, the genealogies, the law, the history of who owned what and who had killed whom, and who owed compensation to whose family, lived inside human memory and got transmitted out loud, at night, by the fire, by people who had nothing else to do until dawn. Odin, Thor, Ragnarok, the world tree, the wolf that swallows the sun. Every single one of those images reached us because it survived hundreds of winters of people retelling it in dark rooms. The Icelandic sagas, written down centuries later, are the sediment left behind by all those nights. Norse mythology is, quite literally, a product of the long night. And notice what that mythology is obsessed with: the sun being chased by a wolf. A final winter, Fimbulwinter, 3 winters in a row, with no summer between them, that precedes the end of the world. This wasn't abstract theology. These were people whose deepest cosmic fear was that the darkness might simply not stop, because every year it looked like it might not. There was also poetry, and it mattered more than we assume. A skald was a professional poet attached to a chieftain or king, and skaldic verse was fiendishly technical, with strict rules of meter and internal rhyme, packed with dense metaphors called kennings. The sea becomes the whale road, blood becomes the wound dew, a ship becomes the horse of the waves. These were composed and memorized and performed in a room where the only light source was a fire, and the only entertainment was whoever was talking. They played games too. Boards for a strategy game called hnefatafl turn up repeatedly in Norse graves and settlements, along with carved gaming pieces of bone, antler, and walrus ivory. It's a deliberately unfair game. One side has a king and fewer pieces trying to escape to a corner, the other side has more pieces trying to trap him. A perfect thing to argue about for 6 hours when you cannot leave the building. And they drank. Ale and mead weren't just recreation, they were calories, and they were safe liquid. But the drinking mattered socially. The feast, the hall, the shared cup, the boasting, that was the machinery of loyalty. A chieftain's power ran on his ability to keep a hall full, warm, fed, and entertained through the winter. Generosity in the dark months bought you loyal men in the summer ones. The hall wasn't a party venue. It was political infrastructure. There's one more thing they did at night, and it's the strangest. They slept differently than you do. Before artificial lighting, the historical record across Europe is full of references to a first sleep and a second sleep. People went to bed not long after dark, slept a few hours, woke naturally in the middle of the night, stayed awake for an hour or two, then slept again until morning. This is documented in medieval texts, court records, diaries, and medical writing, and modern experiments have found that people deprived of artificial light for weeks drift back into exactly this pattern on their own. In a Norwegian winter, with 17 hours of darkness, sleeping in one continuous block wasn't even physically plausible. Nobody sleeps 17 hours, so there was a waking window in the middle of the night in a dark longhouse, with the fire down to embers and everyone breathing around you. People talked quietly, tended the fire, had sex, thought about their dreams which they took extremely seriously as information. Lay there, awake, in the dark, doing nothing. That state, calm, alert, unproductive, dark, was a completely normal part of human experience for thousands of years, and it has essentially vanished from modern life. We have replaced it with insomnia and anxiety and reaching for the phone. So when you ask what Vikings did during the night, the honest answer is almost everything that made them Vikings. They made the sails that crossed oceans. They preserved the food that got them to spring. They memorized the mythology we still tell stories about 1,000 years later. They built the social bonds that held crews together in open water. They played, argued, drank, carved, and slept in two halves with a strange, peaceful gap in the middle. The raids were the highlight reel. The night was the actual civilization. And there's something worth sitting with here. We beat the dark. We flipped a switch and won. Completely. And it was genuinely worth winning. But the Norse lived over half their lives in it, and instead of just enduring it, they filled it with gods and poetry and ships. The darkness didn't stop them from building a culture. The darkness is where they built it. So the next time you wake up at 3 in the morning, wide awake for no reason, lying in the dark with your thoughts moving strangely clearly, don't reach for your phone. Don't call it a problem. Somebody in a smoke-filled longhouse 1,000 years ago was awake in exactly that same gap, listening to the fire, waiting for a sun that took its time coming back.